Welcome to the first day of the Quinn Vest and Dress Sew Along. Now I'm going to be sewing up 3 different versions of the Quinn during the sew along so I can cover all of the steps. I'm going to be sewing up view A, B, and C. So don't be surprised if I jump between different fabrics and views just to make sure that I'm showing you the best view for the step that I'm going over. Now I'm going to be using this 100% linen and like a brown for views A and C, and then I'm using this dark denim for view B, which is that hip length vest. And for my neck and armhole bindings, I've opted to use this 100% cotton shirting for all 3 of the views. You can also use self fabric, especially if your fabric is a little bit more lightweight, but I just thought it would be easier to use the same fabric for all. And then lastly, you do need some fusible interfacing, and then we are ready to get sewing. Now before we get sewing, let's do a teeny bit of preparation. You're going to want to cut all of your notches for all of your pattern pieces. I just do a little snip into the fabric. The seam allowances are 1/2 inch, so make sure that they are small little notches. And then you also need to mark this circle dot on your middle back pattern piece. This is for marking where your tie placement is going to be. I just mark it with a marker here that's very washable, but you can use whatever marking tool that you prefer. One last note is you can mark this circle marking on the right side of your fabric, which will make it easier as we are attaching the ties. Okay, now it's time to go ahead and apply the fusible interfacing. If you haven't done so already, this is going to be fused to the wrong side of your fabric, and we are going to be applying it to both the front facings and the hem facings. Now keep in mind that I am doing view A here, so your pattern pieces are probably going to look a little bit different. Especially keep note of the hem facing. These are curved pattern pieces for view A, but for views B through D, this is a straight pattern piece. Okay, next up is stay stitching. So you're going to want to stay stitch these curved areas along the neckline and the armholes on both the front and the back pattern pieces. You're going to do that stay stitching in the direction that I show here, where you go from top to bottom. And you also are going to be doing that at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. The normal seam allowance is a 1/2 inch, so that will make sure that we don't have to remove any stitching, and then that stay stitching just stays tucked nicely inside of the seam allowance. Now in the instructions, it does also mention doing the stay stitching on the facings. I find that pretty optional because it already has the fusible interfacing. Lastly, I just thought I would say, I know that a lot of people skip stay stitching, and I would urge you, if nothing else, to make sure that you do the stay stitching along that front neckline. That is going to be the area that is most likely to not only stretch out, but the one that you really want to fit well. You don't want that flapping away from your body when you're wearing it. So make sure that if nothing else, you do that stay stitching. Okay, now that we're prepared, we are going to go ahead and start with the actual sewing. So we are going to assemble the front here. So with right sides touching, you are going to pin each of the side fronts to its coordinating middle front. And you're going to want to match notches and be really careful and go slow as you're pinning these together. Because you are pinning 2 opposite curves together, it's going to feel that, especially in this middle bust area here, that it is not going to fit. But keep in mind that we are matching up the stitch line, not the edges, so that is a 1/2 inch in. And if you just go slowly, you put lots and lots of pins in it, you will see that it will match up. And then we're going to go over to our regular sewing machine, and we're going to stitch it at a normal 1/2 inch seam allowance, starting and stopping at that points or those angled little edges, a 1/2 inch in on the top and the bottom. Once again, it can feel a little bit tricky around those curved areas at the bust. Just once again, go slow and make sure that all of that excess is just being, slowly kind of eased under the presser foot, and it will match up and work. Okay, it should look something like this once it is sewn. In order for this to lay flat once it is pressed, we are going to want to go ahead and notch the outward curved areas and do little clips in the inward curve areas. Now, this is going to be especially important the more thick your fabric is. You might want to do more snips and more notches if you have a really like a thicker fabric like a denim like I'm using for view B. So just keep that in mind as you are doing this. Also keep in mind that we are going to be trimming down the seam allowance to about 1/4 of an inch and finishing it. So it will get a little bit thinner and less bulky once we do that. So next we're going to trim down that whole seam allowance to about 1/4 of an inch and finish it in whatever method you prefer. Now I'm just going to do both at the same time by serging it and kind of trimming it as I serge. Okay, it should look something like this when it is done. Now we are going to press these seam allowances together. Even if you did not serge them, you're going to press them together and you're going to press it towards center front. Now I like to do this on a tailor's hand, but you can also do this on maybe a rolled up towel, but that is really helpful around especially the bust area when you're pressing that. And then we're going to edge stitch 1/8 of an inch from the seam into the middle front panel, and you're catching those seam allowances in the line of stitching when you do that. Now when I do any kind of like edge stitching, top stitching, I do like to increase my stitch length because I just think that it looks better. So here I increased it to somewhere between like 3 and 3.5 millimeters. Okay, it should look something like this. It's always nice to give these a nice little press at this point that kind of sets the stitches and helps steam out any kind of like wrinkles that you got when you were stitching. Next, let's go ahead and grab our front facings. We are going to work on those and attach them to the front. So you should have 2 front facings. Once again, I'm doing view A here, so your front facings might look a teeny bit different, less curved at this little bottom area. We're going to go ahead and press in that inside long edge of each of the front facings by about 1/4 of an inch with wrong sides touching. You can use the steam on your iron to really help with any little curved edges, but you should be able to just press that whole thing in by about 1/4 of an inch. Now, I do not measure this. I don't really feel like it's necessary, so I just kind of eyeball it. Now I did just want to show you the front facings for view B here, just so you can see that it does look a little different. Views C and D will even look more different, but it is straight down along that inside edge instead of curved at the bottom. Okay, and then going over to our regular sewing machine, we are going to stitch down that folded edge, stitch about 1/8 of an inch in from the folded edge all the way down along that inside fold that you just made. Okay, and this is what they should look like once they are stitched down. It's not a bad idea to go ahead and give these a press, especially if that folded edge got stretched out a little bit when you were pressing and sewing it. Okay, go ahead and grab your assembled fronts and then take the coordinating front facing and you're going to line up that center front and neckline edges and you're going to pin them. Now you might notice that the neckline facing is just the smallest bit smaller than the main neckline. This is on purpose and that just helps keep that facing and neckline edge kind of rolled to the inside. Now, one thing that some people found a little bit helpful is to mark that pivot point right there at center front, just so that you know exactly where to leave your needle down and continue stitching. So we're going to stitch from the top down to that point right there and then down along that center front edge. Now, if you're sewing views A or B, you are going to leave that bottom angled edge out of your stitching at this point. So you're just going to start at the very top and end at the bottom of your center front. Okay, so it should look like this when you're done. Note here, once again, that I did leave that little angled edge free. If I was stitching either of the dress views, it would go all the way down to the bottom. Okay, now we're going to grade and trim this seam that we just sewed. So in order to grade, what I usually do is I just cut the facing seam allowance in half. If your fabric is really thick, you might want to do a little bit of extra grading, but I find that this pretty much does the trick. And then when it comes to this little area around the center front angle right there at the bottom of the neckline, you're going to trim that a little bit extra to get any bulk out so that you can get a nice point once you turn it right side out. Okay, and now to understitch the seam, we're going to start by first pressing the facing away from the main front and over the seam allowances. Do it mostly on these straighter edges. You're not going to be able to do it all the way into the point, and that's totally fine. Now, if you're one of those people who often skips understitching, please do not, especially on this neckline. It's going to ensure that that lays nicely against your neckline and really gives you that high-end finish. Okay, once that is pressed, we are going to do the stitching. You're going to stitch along that edge about 1/8 of an inch in. You're not going to be able to stitch all the way into that corner right there at center front, and that's totally fine. So you're just going to stitch kind of as far as you can, then lift up your presser foot and then start again maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch after that point and continue stitching all the way down the facing. Now make sure that when you are stitching, you're stitching inside of the facing, not the main garment, and you are catching that seam allowance underneath when you sew. Okay, and this is what it should look like. See that line of stitching right there, right inside of the facing. Once again, that is through not only the facing, but also the seam allowances underneath. Now we're going to go ahead and we are going to press the facing to the inside. I like to just slightly roll that seam towards the inside, especially if you happen to cut your facing in a different fabric, but that just makes sure that you do not see that facing when you're wearing it. So use lots of steam here, and you're also going to want to use some kind of point turner or something to make sure you get a really good point here at that center front corner. Okay, and this is where I'm going to leave you today. So today we pretty much assembled all of the front, and tomorrow we're going to come back and we are going to tackle the back. I hope you found this really helpful, and please let me know in the comments if you have any questions that I can answer for you.